The Galactic Council chambers stood as a marvel of engineering, a vast domed structure suspended in orbit above the neutral world of Zenthos Prime. The space within was a symphony of muted light and weighty silence, broken only by the hushed murmurs of delegates from a dozen species. Today was to be a turning point in interstellar diplomacy, but already tension simmered beneath the surface. At the center of the Grand Chamber, Ambassador Elias Carter sat with his hands folded before him, his expression carefully composed. He was a man accustomed to difficult negotiations, a diplomat who had spent years weaving fragile alliances. Yet, even he could feel the weight of the moment. Across from him, High Chancellor Vornak of the Varani Empire regarded him with unblinking reptilian eyes, his clawed fingers drumming idly against the smooth surface of the council table. "The question before us is simple," Vornak rasped, his voice carrying the deliberate patience of a seasoned statesman. "Can humanity be trusted to coexist peacefully within the galactic community?" A murmur rippled through the assembled representatives. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to voice their doubts, but unable to dismiss them. Elias inhaled slowly. This was not unexpected. "Chancellor," he said, his tone measured, "humanity has honored every treaty we have signed, upheld every accord we have pledged to. Our commitment to peace is not a matter of debate. It is fact. And yet," Vornak countered smoothly, "your fleets expand. Your colonies spread into contested sectors. Even now, your military presence grows stronger." Elias did not flinch, but beside him, Commander Darius Holt let out a quiet scoff. A man of action rather than diplomacy, Holt was here as both a symbol and a safeguard, a reminder that words alone did not secure humanity's survival. His broad frame was rigid, his piercing gaze scanning the gathered aliens with barely concealed skepticism. "Our expansion," Elias continued, choosing his words with care, "is not an act of aggression. It is survival. You all know Earth's history, the wars that nearly consumed us, the lessons we have learned. We do not seek conflict, but we will not leave ourselves vulnerable." A heavy silence followed. Across the table, Supreme Arbiter Zilvan, the session's presiding authority, inclined his elongated head. His species, the Oriani, had long served as impartial mediators, their skeletal forms draped in flowing silver robes that concealed more than they revealed. "The Council recognizes humanity's contributions," Zilvan intoned, his voice an eerie blend of tones that resonated beyond the range of human hearing. "But history has shown us that rapid ascension breeds fear. That fear has consequences." Elias knew this argument well. He had anticipated it, prepared responses for it. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the chamber. "Fear is not justification for distrust." Holt's voice carried an edge, a restrained challenge. He leaned forward slightly, meeting the gazes of those who had begun to murmur again. "If fear alone determines our fate, then no peace here is real. It's just a leash waiting to be tightened." Elias shot him a warning glance, but the damage was done. The chamber erupted in a flurry of overlapping voices, some outraged, others speaking in hurried, conspiratorial whispers. "Enough." Zilvan's voice commanded silence, and the room obeyed. This council was called to establish trust, not erode it. A pause stretched between them. Elias saw the moment slipping away, the balance shifting toward suspicion. He needed to regain control. "Our presence here," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is proof that we seek unity. Humanity does not wish to stand alone, nor do we wish to see the mistakes of the past repeated." His gaze swept across the assembled leaders. "But unity requires trust, and trust must be mutual." Vornak observed him for a long moment before slowly inclining his head. "Then let us hope, Ambassador Carter, that your words are more than just words." The session adjourned soon after, but as Elias stood to leave, Holt stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is a waste of time," he muttered. "They don't want peace. They want control." Elias sighed. "Perhaps, but if we walk away too soon, we confirm their worst fears." Holt didn't argue, but his silence spoke volumes. Above them, unseen but ever watchful, the human fleet lingered on the edge of the system, waiting. Elias Carter paced the length of his quarters, his mind a storm of calculations and contingencies. The meeting had not gone as planned. The undercurrent of suspicion had been stronger than he anticipated, and Holt's outburst had only reinforced the fears already festering within the council. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. There was still time to salvage the talks, but time was thinning. A chime sounded at the door. "Enter," he said, already knowing who it would be. Commander Darius Holt stepped inside, his movements sharp with restrained energy. He was still in his formal uniform, though the rigid collar seemed to do little to restrain the soldier beneath. His expression was unreadable, but Elias knew him well enough to recognize the storm brewing beneath the surface. "They're setting us up," Holt said without preamble. Elias arched an eyebrow. "That's quite the accusation." Holt stepped forward, placing a small data pad on the table between them. "Intercepted transmissions. Our intelligence officers flagged them an hour ago. Multiple alien factions have been moving ships. Strategic repositioning, supply chain alterations, silent fleet movements. This isn't diplomacy. It's preparation." Elias took the device, scanning the data. The numbers were cold, the patterns unmistakable. "You're suggesting they're preparing for war?" Holt's jaw tightened. "I'm saying they never intended peace. We walked into this believing we were negotiating, but they were only ever buying time. Maybe for a coordinated strike. Maybe just to weaken our position before presenting demands we can't accept." Elias considered the implications. If this was true, if these talks were nothing more than a pretense, then humanity had been maneuvered into a corner. The Council was not seeking unity. They were isolating a threat. A second chime interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Elias called. The door slid open, revealing Admiral Jonathan Graves. The seasoned commander was a stark contrast to Holt, grayer, older, but no less sharp. He carried himself with the easy authority of a man who had spent decades navigating both battlefield and bureaucracy. "I take it you've seen the reports," Graves said, stepping inside. Elias nodded. "Holt believes the Council is stalling us, that this entire process is a performance." Graves exhaled through his nose. "That would explain what I'm seeing from orbit. My scouts report increased movement from at least 3 major fleets, all edging toward human space. No official declarations, no broadcasted maneuvers, just quiet, steady encroachment." Holt crossed his arms. "They're waiting for us to disarm ourselves at the negotiation table. When we're vulnerable, they'll strike." Elias stared at the data pad again, his fingers tightening around its edges. He had come here as a diplomat, believing words could build bridges. Now, the bridges were burning, and he was left wondering if they had ever been real. "This doesn't change the fact that we need to handle this carefully," he said finally. "If we react too aggressively, we validate their narrative that humanity is dangerous." Graves tilted his head. "And if we don't react at all, we're signing our own death warrant." A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken truths. A soft alert chimed from the console on the far wall. Elias turned and pressed a key, bringing up the encrypted message feed. A transmission from their diplomatic encryption channel blinked, marked urgent. The message unfolded in sharp, concise text. New evidence presented to the Council. Humanity accused of violating non-aggression accords. Formal demand. Immediate disarmament of military assets in neutral zones. Compliance required for continuation of peace talks. Elias felt a chill creep down his spine. Holt read over his shoulder and let out a bitter laugh. "There it is. They're not even hiding it anymore." Graves' voice was low, controlled. "If we comply, we're finished. They'll strip us of our defenses, leave us open to whatever they have planned." Elias took a slow breath, steadying himself. The illusion of diplomacy had shattered, and all that remained was the cold, undeniable truth. This summit had never been about peace. It had been a test, a game of control. and humanity had just been given its final warning. He turned to the men in the room, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. We can't walk away yet. Not without sending the right message. Graves met his gaze. And what message is that? Elias's expression hardened. That we are not prey. Holt smiled, sharp and knowing. Then let's make sure they understand that before this farce continues. The path forward was clear. The time for diplomacy was over. Elias Carter entered the council chambers with measured steps, his expression unreadable. The air was heavier than before, thick with the weight of expectation. Every alien delegate present could feel it. A shift, an unseen crack forming in the carefully constructed facade of diplomacy. Conversations hushed as he took his seat. Across the great table, High Chancellor Vornak watched him closely, his reptilian features betraying no emotion. The Supreme Arbiter, ever the impartial observer, sat motionless at the head of the room. Commander Darius Holt stood just behind Elias, his presence a silent warning. He had not spoken a word since they left their quarters, but Elias could sense his barely contained anger. Beside them, Admiral Graves had remained on the comms with their fleet until the last possible moment. Now he sat stiffly, hands folded, his gaze locked on the opposition. Zilvan's voice, smooth and resonant, filled the chamber. The Council convenes to address the matter of humanity's compliance with interstellar law. Representative Chlorith of the Zorvani has presented evidence suggesting that your species has deliberately expanded military operations beyond agreed borders. A murmur of approval spread through the delegates. But Elias did not react. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Chlorith, a tall, sinewy alien with dark, glistening skin. The Zorvani were known for their cunning, their ability to manipulate without ever appearing to do so. This was their work, this accusation, this manufactured crisis. Chlorith leaned forward, his elongated fingers tapping against the polished table. We have intercepted transmissions, tactical deployments, hidden fleet maneuvers. Your warships have been sighted in restricted territories, Ambassador Carter. These are not the actions of a species committed to peace. Elias exhaled slowly, then met Chlorith's gaze with unwavering steadiness. Humanity has honored every agreement signed in this chamber. If our warships have been seen near restricted zones, it is because we are responding to the very same fleet movements you claim do not exist. Vornak's clawed hand tightened against the armrest of his chair. A convenient excuse. Holt's patience snapped. An undeniable fact. His voice cut through the room like steel, forcing a moment of silence. We've seen the movements. You know it, and so do we. The only reason you're pressing this now is because you think we'll bow under pressure. Zilvan raised a slender hand, silencing the rising voices. Enough. The matter is not whether the movements exist, but what they represent. His luminous eyes fixed on Elias. Ambassador Carter, does humanity accept the Council's demand to decommission military assets in contested regions? Elias felt the weight of the question pressed down on him. This was the moment they had tried to delay, the inevitable reckoning they had hoped to avoid. No, he said simply. A wave of discontent spread through the assembly. Some delegates looked shocked, others smug, as if they had been expecting this answer all along. Chlorith leaned back, a slow, satisfied smirk playing across his sharp features. Vornak's voice was colder this time. Then you confirm our fears. Humanity is unwilling to compromise. Elias shook his head. Compromise requires good faith. We see none here. A sudden noise echoed from the far side of the chamber, doors sliding open. A group of council guards entered, their weapons holstered but present nonetheless. A show of force. A warning. Graves shifted beside him. Holt tensed. Elias kept his hand steady on the table. Chlorith's voice was smooth, practiced. If humanity refuses to adhere to council law, then the council will take appropriate action. Holt let out a breath of quiet laughter, shaking his head. You mean war. Vornak did not deny it. Elias stood, His movements were slow, deliberate, as he adjusted the cuffs of his uniform and straightened his posture. His next words would define the future, not just for him, not just for the men standing beside him, but for every human beyond the station. He met Zilvan's unreadable gaze, then turned to the assembled leaders who had already decided humanity's fate before the summit had even begun. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Silence crashed over the room. Even the guards hesitated, waiting for further orders. Holt stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Graves followed without a word. One by one, the human delegation turned, walking toward the chamber doors with measured, unhurried steps. For the first time in history, humanity left the table. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the vast corridors of the Galactic Council Station. Elias Carter led the way, his expression unreadable, his mind a storm of calculations. Behind him, Holt and Graves walked in silence, their presence a shield against the unseen eyes that followed their every move. The air was thick with the unspoken weight of what they had just done. No one had ever walked out of a council summit before, certainly not in direct defiance of the assembled galactic powers. The silence between them held until they reached the docking bay, where the gleaming form of the Vanguard awaited them. The human flagship stood like a sentinel among the diplomatic cruisers, its reinforced hull a stark contrast to the sleek, ornamental vessels of the other delegations. Its very presence was a statement. Humanity would not be left defenseless. Graves broke the silence first. "They won't let this stand." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Walking away wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration. Elias exhaled slowly, turning to face him. "They declared were the moment they demanded we disarm. All we did was refuse to kneel." Holt nodded in agreement. "And now they have to decide how far they're willing to go. If they expected us to beg for a place at their table, they just learned otherwise." A chime sounded from Elias's wrist console, an incoming transmission. He tapped the screen, and the voice of Fleet Marshal Royce crackled through the secure channel. "Ambassador, the moment you left that chamber, half the council delegation started scrambling. We're picking up a flurry of encrypted communications. No formal response yet, but we're seeing military mobilization along 3 major fronts." Elias's jaw tightened. "And our position? Our fleets are holding, but we're already being hailed by multiple factions demanding we return to the negotiations." A pause. "I assume that's not happening." Elias exchanged a glance with Graves, then with Holt. "No," he said firmly. "It's not." Royce's voice remained calm. "Then we move to contingency plans." "What's your next move?" Elias considered his options. They could return to Earth, consolidate defenses, prepare for what was coming. But retreating entirely from the council space would send the wrong message. Humanity couldn't afford to appear cornered. "We hold our position at Zenthos Prime," he decided. "Let them decide how they want to handle this." Holt smirked. "Make them sweat." Graves was already issuing orders into his comms, ensuring their fleet adjusted formations to match the growing tension. They boarded the Vanguard without another word, each of them settling into their roles as the ship's engines rumbled to life beneath their feet. As the docking clamps disengaged and the ship eased away from the station, Elias stood at the command deck, watching the stars shift around them. The galaxy had just been given an ultimatum. Now, they would see who blinked first. The stars burned cold beyond the viewport, their distant light indifferent to the storm brewing across the galaxy. Aboard the Vanguard, Elias Carter stood in silence, hands clasped behind his back as he watched the endless void. Reports streamed across the hollow display before him. Fleet movements, intercepted communications, shifting alliances. The aftermath of humanity's walkout had been immediate and violent. The Galactic Council had not issued a formal declaration of war, not yet, but the pieces were already in motion. Blockades were forming around human-controlled sectors. Trade routes were being severed, and military assets were shifting in quiet, deliberate patterns. The message was clear. Humanity would be punished for its defiance. The door behind him slid open. Footsteps. He didn't need to turn and know who it was. "They're testing us," Darius Holt said, stepping to his side. His voice was calm, but the energy beneath it was unmistakable. "Small incursions. Probes along our borders. They're waiting to see how we'll react." Elias exhaled slowly. "And our response?" Holt's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "So far? Restraint." He turned to face him fully. "But that won't last. We both know it." Elias did. Humanity had spent decades trying to prove itself to the greater galactic order, playing by their rules, abiding by their laws, seeking a seat at their table. That era was over. The Council had made it clear. Humanity was not welcome as equals. They were expected to submit, to bend, to be brought to heel. A soft chime sounded from the console, a priority transmission. Elias tapped the interface, and the hardened features of Fleet Marshal Royce materialized before them. His expression was grim. "They just made their first move," Royce said without preamble. "Zorvani forces have seized outposts in the Vascan Belt. No warning, no negotiation. They're daring us to respond." Holt's fist clenched. "And what's our official stance?" Royce's gaze locked onto Elias. "That's your call, Ambassador." The weight of the moment settled over him. The old rules no longer applied. Every decision from this point forward would shape the future, not just for their fleet, not just for the colonies, but for the very survival of their species. Elias straightened, his voice steady when he spoke. "We reclaim what's ours." Royce gave a sharp nod. "Understood." The transmission cut, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship around them. Holt exhaled, a slow, satisfied breath. It started. Elias turned back to the viewport, watching the darkness beyond. A new war had begun, not one of survival, but of sovereignty. For the first time, humanity would not fight for acceptance. This time, they would fight to win.